Welcome to Dusky Lore. Close your eyes, dim the lights, and listen closely as the shadows begin to speak. Story 1. I was driving back home with my grandmother from Nebraska. We were heading south on Highway 45. Everything seemed completely normal. The trip was calm, no turns, no detours, just one long straight stretch of highway. Suddenly, without understanding how, we found ourselves inside a small town. There were no exits or side roads, only a main street that led us all the way to the end of the place. At the end of that street, we saw a strange, enormous building, something like a church or a town hall, painted in shades of gray and black. There were barely any cars parked, and the few we saw looked like they were from different eras, as if the town had been built in the 1950s but with details added from the 1980s. The moment we crossed the town's boundary, my grandmother became very nervous. I noticed immediately something wasn't right. The atmosphere was unreal, as if we had stepped into a set or a painting. It felt more like someone's attempt, someone who had never seen an American town, trying to draw what they imagined one would look like. The houses, the shops, the streets. Everything looked strange, artificial. The road continued straight, with no turns, as if we were driving toward nowhere. One moment we were surrounded by forest, so thick you couldn't see beyond the trees, and the next we were already inside that tiny place. We didn't see a single person, and now that I think about it, maybe that was for the best. I didn't want to know who lived there. At the end of the street stood that huge building, gray, with a black roof and 4 towers. When I saw it, I knew something very out of the ordinary was happening. Highways like 45 don't just end in the middle of nowhere, especially not in a place that seemed not to exist at all. Everything looked almost normal if you just drove past, but if you stopped and looked closely, fear crept in. The buildings had windows placed incorrectly, between floors or in places where no one could possibly look out. Some shops had no doors or signs, and there was no other road in or out. It was as if someone had tried to create the illusion of a town without understanding how a real one should be. And the trees. I remembered them clearly. When we arrived, the forest was so dense that branches were hitting my car. It gave the impression that no one else had ever passed through there before. My grandmother, sitting beside me, was completely terrified. She didn't say a word, but her expression said everything. She was shaking. Finally, in a low voice, she told me we had to leave immediately. I think I was lucky she was with me, because if I had been alone, my curiosity would have made me stop. I felt like we had crossed into a place that didn't belong to our world, somewhere humans were not meant to see. It was as if that town were a facade, a kind of disguise hiding something else. Maybe they built it as a distraction, in case someone ended up there by mistake. I'm grateful to my grandmother, because she probably saved my life. I'm sure that without her, I would have parked the car and gotten out to explore. Instead, I managed to turn the car around in a very tight space and we went back the way we had come. On the way back, I had the feeling the road wouldn't let us leave, as if the town wanted to keep us. But little by little, the buildings began to fade and we entered the forest again. After a while, we saw highway signs again. The trees opened up, and I felt an enormous sense of relief. To my surprise, now we were heading north, exactly the opposite direction of where we were supposed to be going. I made a U-turn with some fear, and when I looked in the rearview mirror, I saw the town slowly fading away, leaving behind a completely normal road. We returned to the point from before, but there was no trace of that place anymore. No buildings, no streets, nothing. My grandmother was still trembling, and we both knew we had experienced something impossible to explain. I've tried to look for that town on maps, but there's no record of it. I don't even know its name, and I'm sure there's nothing like it anywhere in Mississippi. So if you ever drive at night, be careful. What looks like a town can disappear completely. Story 2. In October 2013, I was only 21 years old and working in a warehouse. My shift was from 3 p.m. to 11 p.m. Monday through Friday. Every night when I left work, I noticed a curious pattern among my coworkers. Most of them turned right when leaving the parking lot, while only 2 or 3 of us turned left. It was a small detail, but consistent in our daily routine. That night, my 2 coworkers who usually turned with me had already left earlier, so I had to drive alone. I turned left as always, and when I reached the first traffic light, I noticed an SUV stopped right behind me. It made me a little uncomfortable because the road had 2 lanes and the other one was completely empty. But the vehicle chose to stay right in my lane. I didn't think too much of it at the time. When the light turned to green, I drove forward normally, but the SUV didn't move away from me. It kept an exact distance, following me while I was going about 110 kilometers per hour, 70 miles per hour, in the left lane. I planned to spend some time at my parents' house, since I had to pass by there anyway to get home. However, every time I looked in the mirror, the SUV's headlights were still there. I decided to move into the right lane and slow down, thinking it would pass me, but the SUV slowed down too. That was when I started to feel that something wasn't right. I dropped the idea of visiting my parents and decided to go straight home. When I merged onto the highway, I sped up to about 135 or 140 kilometers per hour, 85 to 90 miles per hour, trying to leave it behind, but it kept following me. Every time I changed lanes, the driver did the same. If I increased speed, he did too. If I braked, so did he. When I took the exit toward my neighborhood, I was already very nervous. I didn't want to go directly to my apartment, so I drove past and pulled into a gas station. I parked next to a pump, pretending I was going to get gas, and the SUV stopped right behind me again. When I looked in the mirror, I saw that inside were 2 men wearing ski masks. At that moment, 2 homeless men who were nearby approached my car asking for money, and I honestly think they saved my life. As soon as they came up, the SUV pulled away slowly and left. I waited a few minutes for them to get farther down the street before I left, but when I finally did, I saw the vehicle make a U-turn in the middle of the road and start following me again. This time, I managed to lose them by taking several detours until I couldn't see their headlights anymore. I never ran into that SUV again, but I'm convinced those 2 men saved me that night. If they hadn't shown up at that exact moment, I don't know what would have happened to me. Story 3. This happened when I was in my first year of secondary school. It was shortly after winter, so the night air was cold. My friend, let's call her Veronica, texted me asking what I was doing. To better understand what happened, I have to explain how the places were laid out. At the time, I was at my cousin's house, which was about 8 blocks from Veronica's house. The closest McDonald's was about a quarter mile from both of our houses, right across from a Target and a few other fast food restaurants. About a mile and a half from there was a Burger King. I don't remember who had the brilliant idea to sneak out at 11 at night just to buy food, but we did it anyway. Leaving the house without permission was surprisingly easy, even though it was the first time I'd ever tried. Veronica, on the other hand, had quite a bit of experience with that. It was late, and I was wearing short pajamas and an oversized football t-shirt. Looking back, it wasn't the best choice for sneaking out at that hour, especially living in a not very safe city. We met halfway and started walking toward McDonald's, laughing, talking about relationship drama, and complaining about an unbearable teacher we both had. The streets weren't empty, but there also wasn't much traffic. The only thing I was worried about was running into my mom if she happened to drive by at that time. We decided to cut through Target's large parking lot to get there faster. McDonald's and Target were on a slight incline if you walked west to east, but we were going south to north, so that wasn't an issue. As we crossed the street that connected Target to McDonald's, we saw a man. He must have been about 5 feet 5 inches, wearing a blue hoodie and shorts. At the time, Veronica was about 5 feet 2 inches, and I was about 5 feet 4 inches, so the guy wasn't much taller than us. I didn't think much of it because we were really caught up in our conversation, laughing at stupid things, but his image stuck in my mind. Veronica, for her part, had a habit of constantly looking over her shoulder whenever we walked together, no matter the time. Suddenly, she linked her arm with mine and whispered that the man was following us. I tried to glance back discreetly. I thought maybe she was joking. We had a pretty weird sense of humor, but unfortunately it wasn't a joke. Veronica started to speed up, but I stopped her by squeezing her arm. I told her not to run, or the guy would realize we'd noticed him. Our city didn't have a good reputation, and since I was little, I'd been taught to always stay alert. I wasn't exactly the street smartest. I preferred books, but I wasn't naive. I suggested we go into Target. As we crossed the street back, I looked behind us and saw that the man was crossing too. Veronica was already terrified, and I was laughing. Not because I didn't feel scared, but because it seemed absurd. What were the odds that the first time I ever snuck out of the house, I'd end up being followed by a stranger? The funniest part is that after that, I snuck out a couple more times. I guess I just wanted to live the full experience of being a teenager. As we crossed Target's huge parking lot, I decided to video call my cousin to tell her what was happening. I laughed while I talked, but Veronica was on the verge of a panic attack. I hung up suddenly, because we both agreed to run toward Target's entrance. Once inside, we walked around the aisles for a while, just to make sure he hadn't followed us in. Luckily, he didn't. We sat near the glass windows by the entrance to figure out what to do. Veronica said she had seen him walk past Target, heading in the same direction we had come from. Behind the building there was a park, the same one I used to cut through to get home, but there was no way I was going to do that night. I called my older brother to ask for help, but he told me I should call my cousin instead so she could come pick us up. So I texted her and asked her to come with her big burly boyfriend, who was staying at her house. She agreed and said she'd come right away. That calmed Veronica down, even though I was still pretty calm. A little later, a man came into Target and walked over to us. I don't remember his age exactly, but he must have been around 50 or 55. He told us he had been in the McDonald's drive-thru when he saw us walking and noticed that the guy was following us. He added that he had also seen us go into Target, and he decided to approach to make sure we were okay. We quickly told him what had happened and thanked him for his concern, assuring him that our family was on the way. A few minutes later, my cousin arrived in the car with her boyfriend and her father. Yes, we got caught, but I didn't get punished, and after all, they were my cousins, and I had always been a good kid. Besides, my mom would have been more upset with them for not noticing sooner. Veronica came with me back to my cousin's house, and we spent the rest of the night talking about what had happened. We even video called one of our older friends to tell him everything. Knowing someone else had seen the guy made me realize how real it was. Since then, it's happened to me a couple more times that I've been followed on the street, and it left me with terrible anxiety. Now I'm completely sure of this. I will never walk alone at night again. Story 4. This happened in 2014 when I was about 12 years old. It was summer vacation, and it was already past 11 at night. I was relaxing in the living room when my mom came in and asked if I wanted to go with her to pay the water bill. I've always liked going out at night, especially on those spontaneous car rides. So I said yes without hesitation. The three of us got into the vehicle, my mom, my sister, and me, and we started driving toward the water depot, or the water tower as we used to call it. The darkness was almost total. The only thing lighting the road was the moonlight reflecting on the asphalt. During the drive, we were chatting and laughing, having a good time, until we finally got there. I should mention that I'm extremely afraid of the dark, especially in the area where we lived. At night, everything became incredibly dark, and there were hardly any streetlights. Still, when we parked next to the tower, I opened the door to get out, and I heard some strange noises coming from exactly the direction of the depot. I immediately told my mom what I'd heard. but she thought I was joking or that I was just letting my fear get to me. And she knows me very well. She knows the dark makes my skin crawl. Even so, I got out of the truck slowly, cautiously. I walked to the door where I was supposed to drop the envelope with the payment, slipped it in quickly, and hurried back to the vehicle. My mom laughed at me as she started the car to drive us away. We had barely gotten onto the road when, suddenly, a gigantic shadow flew right in front of us. It was huge, at least 8 feet tall, with wings that stretched more than 10 feet. I only saw it for an instant, but it was grayish, with a human-like figure, which made it even more terrifying. We watched as the silhouette rose back up toward the tower and then descended again, moving slowly and very close to the ground. We froze. It was as if time had stopped. We couldn't believe what we were seeing. It was impossible. And yet, it was there. Suddenly, both my mom and I started screaming. She slammed on the gas and told me to look behind us, to make sure that thing wasn't following us. My sister, who had been distracted on her phone, didn't see anything. But when she heard us screaming, she got just as nervous as we were. When we got home, we ran out of the car and got inside as fast as we could. That night I couldn't sleep. I even cried a little. Something in me knew what we had seen was real. Later on, I found out that in that area there was a natural conservation zone, and I thought maybe that creature lived there. A year later, while I was watching an episode of the show Monsters and Mysteries in America, they presented a case about flying beings with human-like shapes. As soon as I saw it, I burst into tears. The descriptions matched almost perfectly with what my family and I had witnessed. I ran to tell my mom. The case on the show had happened in the Ozarks in Missouri, which are about 4 hours from where we live. The men interviewed on the show described the exact same thing. The gray color of the being, its height, its wingspan, its humanoid shape, and the way it descended from the sky and crossed in front of their vehicle. A lot of people might not believe us, and that's fine. But honestly, someone doubting the story doesn't change the fact that that creature was real. Story 5. I'm a 21-year-old girl, and this happened when I had just turned 18. At the time, I got a job at a CVS pharmacy about 20 minutes from my house. It was summer, right before starting college. The job was fine. They paid better than other nearby places, like grocery stores or fast food restaurants. The only downside was that I always got the night shift, since I was the youngest and newest employee. Still, I didn't mind too much. Nights were quiet, especially after the pharmacy section closed, and I usually passed the time on my phone while I finished my shift. But that night wasn't like the others. The pharmacist had to stay until 9 p.m. to finish some pending tasks, so there was still some activity in that area. Around 8:30, a man came into the store. Just seeing him made me feel something strange, a kind of bad feeling. He was a bulky guy, with greasy hair and clothes and dirty, like he hadn't bathed in days. I greeted him with the usual good evening, but he only stared at me for a few seconds and kept walking toward the pharmacy area. When it was time to close, 9 o'clock sharp, the pharmacy employees started gathering their things. The man, however, was no longer in sight. I asked one of the techs, "Did you help the guy who came in a little while ago?" "What guy?" she replied, confused, as she grabbed her bag and left. A chill ran through my body. I thought, what if he's still inside the store? I started walking through the aisles, checking them one by one. Everything seemed empty. Until, when I turned toward the aisle that led to the bathrooms, I saw him. He was there, standing in the darkness, staring at me. "What time do you close?" he muttered, without taking his eyes off mine. For a moment, I didn't understand what he'd said. His voice was low, almost guttural. Then I noticed a horrible smell, a mix of rancid sweat and rotting meat, so strong I had to fight back nausea. "At 9. We close at 9, I managed to answer. He didn't say anything else. He walked past me in silence, and the stench followed him as he left the store. After making sure the bathrooms were empty and everything was in order, I got ready to leave. My manager walked me to my car since it was night, and that's when I noticed the man's car was parked next to mine, in the darkness of the parking lot. I got into my vehicle as fast as I could. The guy did the same. He got into his just as I started the engine. At first, I thought it was just a coincidence, but as I drove down the road, I realized he was still behind me. I figured he would turn off soon onto another street. But no, he kept following me the whole way, even as I got closer to my neighborhood. That's when I knew I had to act fast. I decided to take a longer route, with unexpected turns, trying to lose him. As soon as I thought I had shaken him, I sped up as much as I could, practically flying through the streets until I got home. That night I went straight into the garage, closed the door, and left the car inside so no one could see it from the street. For hours I stayed alert, waiting to hear an engine or see headlights, but no car ever came down my street. And fortunately, I never saw that man again.